Continuing our look at the RNC, other highlights included Daryl Glenn's speaking opportunity, Ted Cruz refusing to endorse Donald Trump during his primetime speech, and a speechwriter falling on her sword after Melania Trump quoted Michelle Obama twice. David, we just got done talking about how the conventions don't decide elections, but they do decide momentum. When you look at the RNC as a whole, from everything that we saw, what do you draw as the key points, the momentum that people are pulling away from this event?
Well, Daryl Glenn helped himself, I think. It was a good, pretty, mainstream conservative Republican speech, and he delivered it well. Cruz saying, vote your conscience for people who you believe will defend freedom and the Constitution, is a principle that ought to apply for every voter in every election. And it's sort of telling that the pro-Trump people think that was, oh, well, that you're saying to vote against us then. It's certainly not going to help Hillary. I mean, Hillary saying, vote your conscience is like William Howard Taft saying, vote for slenderness. If Cruz's delivery and tone had been as good during the primaries as they were Wednesday night, he might well be the nominee. And this thing about Melania and Michelle, as you say, they've both described their parents in nearly identical terms in some ways. And I think the obvious thing to ask is, well, maybe they're sisters. I think it's about time we saw the birth certificates for both of them.
Between birth certificates and William Howard Taft smack, you're just going to find things you can't find anywhere else right here in Colorado Inside Out. You're welcome, viewers. Eric, of all the things that weren't Thursday night, what were the highlights for you? And anything that you think will have a lasting effect? Maybe not till November, but at least for a couple of news cycles.
Oh, a couple quick thoughts. First of all, touche, David. Well done. For Daryl Glenn, I mean, I have to be honest. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, that was Daryl Glenn's speech. It might have been a fine speech for the audience. It got a decent reception on the floor, but the audience wasn't the floor. The audience was supposed to be back home in Colorado, and none of the networks covered it. So to my estimation, it's a big so what. A couple other takeaways. I was somewhat distressed. There's no one around this table or probably around town that's been more critical of Hillary Clinton and the corruption that seems almost attendant to her. But yet there was something off-putting about this convention, the constant refrains of lock her up, the Chris Christie speech where it was a recite and response kind of deal, and it was always the guilty, guilty. I mean, America has not historically been a country where what one party wants to do to the leader of the other party is throw him in jail. And we seem to be almost heading down that road in our anger and our alienation and our polarization. And I found that, and this is no brief for Hillary Clinton, but I found that to be disturbing. And then my main takeaway from this convention is what could have been. Remember where we were 2 months ago when we all thought this was going to be the historic convention. This was going to, it had the potential to be multiple ballots with a real challenge. And obviously events unfolded otherwise, and it turned out to be anything but. And it was hard watching. I forced myself to do it given my role, but it was hard TV watching a bunch of the time.
Now, I agree that it's not even just about optimism, but it's almost as if you want to say, okay, let's grant this. If your enemy doesn't exist, now what? And if that was taken away as a subject matter for that convention, exactly, it'd be a couple of Trump speeches from his kids, not him, and that'd be about it. So I get your point there. Natasha, we saw the different elements throughout the convention. Again, it's more of what you pull away from the entire event. Was there a highlight for you that wasn't Thursday night that struck a chord?
It wasn't Thursday night. If it was Thursday night, it would be Ivanka. I think she did a fantastic job of bridging the groups. I think Cruz's speech, maybe not a high, I don't know how to characterize it. I think it depends on how you feel about what he said. But I think that's something we're going to talk about for a long time. One of the things that I think was missing from all this, and this is less of a political analysis and more of just as an American how I feel about the conventions. They're always paired around the time of the Olympics. It becomes this really this moment of patriotism. So whatever party you believe in, there's a sense of putting out policy. Where's our country going? going? What are our plans for the future? In the midst of this sort of global competition and how America plays into it. And I've loved that since a kid. It's one of my first memories when I was 4 years old watching both the conventions and the Olympics. And I'm sitting there with my son, who's nearly 4 years old, and I put him to bed before those speeches. He didn't watch them last night. And I'll be fair, and I'll do that again next week as well. But it's sad that I don't feel like that spirit is in the air this summer. And that's something that America's missing right now.
Patty, there were a lot of wacky moments over the week. I think my particular surreal highlight was after the Thursday speech, and the DJ in the arena for some reason played All Right Now right after the speech, and then the Stones, You Can't Always Get What You Want. For surrealness, that just, you got to be kidding me. For things that weren't Donald Trump's speech, what were the things that hit you?
Well, certainly the soundtrack. We were laughing over You Can't Always Get What You Want last night, too. I thought what was amazing is there was no lightness to this at all. When you think about Ronald Reagan and Morning in America, why couldn't we have had some lightness? Why couldn't we have had some optimism? That would have played much better than It's Midnight in America, which is really what we got instead. So I thought they missed a boat on that, missed a beat. I thought Trump's two appearances that weren't his big speech, his big, really, really long, boring speech, were funny. I mean, I thought when he came out into the audience during Cruz, that was really entertaining. The real highlights of this convention were clearly the comics, who did provide the lightness and the brightness at the end, but look at all the material they had to work with.